I'd been waiting for this moment for as long as I could remember. Paris at night, the Eiffel Tower glowing against the velvet sky. I wanted to feel the magic, the romance of the city, the hum of life below me. It was everything I had imagined until it wasn't. Standing on the second observation deck, I leaned over the railing, marveling at the glittering lights of the city. The air was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors below. It was peaceful. Then I saw him, a man in a dark coat, standing a few feet away, staring down at the same view. At first, he seemed like any other tourist. His posture was casual, his hands resting on the cold metal railing. But something about him felt wrong. I can't explain it. Maybe it was the way his coat looked out of place, too heavy for the mild evening, or the stillness of his figure, as if he were frozen in time. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the Seine winding through the city below. But then he turned, not gradually, not naturally, but in one sharp, almost mechanical movement. His head snapped toward me, and our eyes locked. I wish I could describe his face, but even now, it feels like trying to remember a dream slipping through my fingers. His skin was pale, almost translucent like a faded photograph. His eyes weren't just hollow. They felt bottomless, like staring into a void. And yet, they were fixed on me, unblinking, unrelenting. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my voice caught in my throat. A wave of cold swept over me, colder than the wind that had been brushing against my cheeks moments before. Then I blinked. He was gone. Not he walked away gone. Not he melted into the crowd gone. He was just not there. One moment he was staring into my soul, and the next I was alone. I looked around, my heart pounding against my ribs. People were scattered across the deck, couples snapping selfies, children pointing at the lights, a street performer playing the accordion below. It was all so normal, but I felt anything but. Maybe I imagined him. Maybe I was tired, jet-lagged, or overwhelmed by the city's charm. That's what I told myself as I gripped the railing tighter, my knuckles white against the cold metal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the deck. A mother with her toddler, a group of teenagers laughing too loudly, a man in a red scarf sipping coffee. No one paid me any attention. No one looked remotely like the man in the coat. But then, in the reflection of the glass, I thought I saw something, a shadow, fleeting and out of place, moving behind me. My breath hitched, and I spun around, expecting to find him there. Nothing. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, the hum of the city fading into the background. It wasn't until someone brushed past me, muttering an apology in French, that I realized how ridiculous I looked. A grown adult, jumping at shadows. Get it together, I whispered under my breath, trying to laugh it off. My voice sounded weak, even to me, but the uneasy feeling stayed. I left the railing and walked toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing too loudly in my ears. I wanted to go back to my hotel, to the safety of four walls and a locked door. As I waited for the elevator, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see him again. The deck looked empty now, the crowds thinning as the night grew later. But in the corner, where the shadows pulled darkest, I thought I saw movement. A shape, faint and indistinct, like smoke curling at the edges. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, startling me. I stepped inside quickly, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors began to close, but just before they did, I swore I saw him again. Not on the deck this time, but in the reflection of the elevator doors. His hollow eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and then the doors shut. This trip to Paris was supposed to be my escape. Life back home had spiraled into chaos, work stress, endless arguments, sleepless nights. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a break, a moment to clear my head and remind myself of the beauty in the world. Paris felt like the perfect place for that, and the Eiffel Tower was meant to be the crown jewel of my journey. I'd imagined standing there, taking in the city lights, and feeling a sense of peace wash over me. But after what happened on the observation deck, that peace felt impossibly far away. My legs felt weak as I leaned against the cold railing, trying to steady my breathing. The city below me sparkled like a dream, but all I could focus on was the tight knot forming in my chest. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that I'd see him again, the man in the dark coat. "Pull yourself together," I muttered, barely audible. My voice sounded foreign, like it didn't belong to me. But it was no use. Every time someone brushed past me, my heart leapt into my throat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not the casual curiosity of passing strangers, but something heavier, more invasive. It felt cold, like an invisible presence pressing against my back. It reminded me of something. Back home, there were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I'd hold my breath, staring into the darkness, too afraid to move. And every time, I tell myself it was just a nightmare. But those nights left a mark on me. This was worse. This wasn't a dream. I tried to focus on the city lights, letting the hum of Paris fill my ears. The distant murmur of traffic, the soft laughter of tourists, the faint tune of a street performer's accordion. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was imagining things. Then I saw something in the glass reflection of the deck. A shadow, quick, fleeting, but unmistakable. It moved behind me. My stomach twisted, and I spun around, expecting to find someone or something standing there. But the space was empty. I scanned the faces of the other visitors, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. A man in a red scarf, a couple posing for photos, a family with 2 kids arguing over who got the better view. It all seemed normal, too normal. That only made it worse. The air felt heavier now, colder. My hands gripped the railing tighter, and I realized they were trembling. I told myself to breathe, to stop letting my imagination get the better of me. "It's nothing," I whispered, like saying it out loud would make it true. But my body didn't believe the lie. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the noise of the city. I forced myself to move, stepping away from the railing. The lights of Paris, once enchanting, now felt distant and dim. I tried to lose myself in the crowd, hoping the presence, whatever it was, would lose me too. As I walked, I thought I felt it again, the sensation of being watched, of eyes burning into the back of my neck. I stopped and turned quickly, but no one was there. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something else? I hated myself for even thinking it, but the idea wouldn't leave my mind. I tried to distract myself by taking in the little details around me. The sound of heels clicking on the metal floor, the faint smell of coffee wafting up from the cafe below. But every sound felt sharper, every shadow more menacing. At one point, I caught my reflection in the glass again. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing behind me, but when I turned, it was gone. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, and I barely recognized myself. This was supposed to be a reset, a chance to find peace. Instead, I felt more trapped than ever. Whatever had shifted inside me on that deck, it wasn't going away. The weight of unseen eyes stayed with me, relentless. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something real was lurking in the shadows. But one thing was certain, I couldn't stay there much longer. I decided it was time to leave the observation deck. My nerves were frayed, and the open air, once invigorating, now felt suffocating. I hurried toward the elevator, my steps quick and uneven, my mind racing with every possible explanation for what I'd experienced. When I stepped inside, the air was cold, almost sterile. The metal walls seemed to hum faintly, the sound amplifying the eerie quiet. I pressed the button for the ground floor, leaning back against the wall and exhaling a shaky breath. Finally, a moment to collect myself. As the doors began to close, I caught something in the polished reflection of the metal panel. Just a flicker, a shadow, moving behind me. My stomach dropped, my breath caught in my throat. Without thinking, I turned, expecting to see someone, or worse, something standing there. But the elevator was empty, completely empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tried to reason with myself. It was just a trick of the light, shadows shifting, a reflection of someone outside. Anything. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the gnawing dread wouldn't leave. My fingers hovered over the control panel, indecisive, before they slammed the emergency stop button. The elevator jolted to a halt, the sudden motion nearly knocking me off balance. The quiet that followed was deafening, an unnatural kind of silence that pressed in on me from all sides. For a moment, I thought I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. Then I realized it wasn't my heartbeat. It was footsteps, faint at first, deliberate and slow, coming from somewhere outside the elevator. My skin prickled as the sound grew louder, each step echoing up through the metal frame of the tower. The stairwell, I whispered to myself, the words barely audible. But the thought made no sense. The stairs weren't supposed to be open this late at night, not for tourists. I stood frozen, staring at the elevator doors as if they might burst open at any moment. My mind raced with questions. Who was out there? Was it just a guard? Maybe a late worker? But deep down, I knew better. The steps didn't sound hurried or purposeful. They sounded patient. My hand hovered over the control panel again, trembling. My instinct screamed to me to restart the elevator, to get as far away from that sound as possible. But I couldn't bring myself to move. I just stood there listening. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It felt alive, heavy, pressing against my ears like it was trying to drown me. I strained to hear anything, any hint of movement, but the void outside the elevator was absolute. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. My fingers finally found the courage to press the button to restart the elevator. The hum of the machinery came back to life, and the soft lurch of movement almost made me collapse with relief. But that relief didn't last long. As the elevator descended, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone was out there. I kept my eyes fixed on the doors, half expecting them to slide open at any moment, revealing what? I didn't know. The thought paralyzed me. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, the weight of dread had settled so deeply in my chest that I could barely breathe. I stepped out onto the plaza, but the sense of safety I'd hoped for didn't come. Instead, the footsteps echoed in my mind, over and over, and I couldn't help but wonder, if they had stopped, where had they gone? As soon as I stepped out onto the ground level, I felt a fleeting sense of relief, like I'd finally escaped the stifling walls of the elevator. But the plaza outside, usually buzzing with life, was eerily quiet. The vastness of the space should have been liberating, but instead, it felt oppressive, like the towering iron structure above me was closing in. I took a shaky breath and glanced around, trying to ground myself in the familiar. The smell of freshly baked crepes drifted from a nearby stand, mingling with the faint scent of damp grass. The Seine glimmered in the distance, and the occasional hum of a passing car broke the silence. But none of it felt real. And then I saw him. The man in the dark coat was there again, standing near one of the massive iron beams that anchored the Eiffel Tower. This figure was partially obscured by shadows, his posture unnervingly still, as if he were waiting. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse quicken, the rhythmic thud in my ears drowning out everything else. I told myself not to panic, not to jump to conclusions, but my body betrayed me. My palms were slick with sweat, and my knees felt unsteady. Before I could stop myself, I called out, "Hey, do you need help?" My voice echoed across the square, fragile and small against the vastness of the space. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I thought he was lost or hurt, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that he was real. But he didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, motionless, like a statue carved from the shadows themselves. The longer I stared, the more I realized how unnatural his stillness was. It wasn't the kind of calm a person could hold. It was something entirely different. My feet moved before my mind caught up, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes feeling impossibly loud in the empty plaza. Each step toward him sent a new wave of doubt crashing over me. What was I doing? What was I hoping to find? As I drew closer, the air seemed to change. The night had been chilly, but this was different. The closer I got, the colder it became, like stepping into a void where warmth couldn't exist. My skin prickled, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I didn't. When I was close enough to see his face, Clearly, I froze. His features were wrong. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, skin stretched too tightly over bone. It was like looking at a faded photograph, the kind that had been left too long in the sun, drained of color and life. And then, without warning, he moved, or rather, he didn't move. He disappeared. One moment he was there, his lifeless eyes locked on mine, and the next he was gone. Not in the way someone might walk away or slip into the shadows. It was instantaneous, like he had never been there at all. I stumbled back, my breath hitching as my gaze darted around the plaza. Where had he gone? How could he have vanished so quickly? I took a hesitant step forward, to the exact spot where he had been standing. The ground beneath my feet was hard and cold, but the air around me felt different, sharper, heavier. I reached out instinctively, as if I might feel something lingering, but all I felt was the bitter chill seeping into my skin. The space was empty, but it didn't feel empty. My skin crawled as if unseen fingers were brushing against me, delicate but deliberate. I clenched my fists, trying to focus on the rhythmic inhale and exhale of my breathing, but it didn't help. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice trembling. It can't be, but the cold was real. The prickle on my skin was real, and the fear that clawed at my chest, threatening to consume me entirely, was real. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there again, watching. But there was nothing, only the tower, its iron beams casting jagged shadows across the ground, and the faint sound of a distant accordion. I wanted to run, to leave the square and never look back, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the emptiness where he had been, replaying the moment in my mind over and over. I had come to Paris to find peace, to escape the chaos of my life. Instead, I had found something far worse, something I couldn't explain, couldn't understand. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure it was over. Leaving the tower should have brought relief. I told myself that once I was out in the open, with the lights of Paris guiding me, the unease would fade. But it didn't. If anything, it got worse. The Champ de Mars stretched out before me, a quiet expanse of trees and pathways, with the Eiffel Tower standing tall behind me. The park was almost empty, the occasional jogger or couple wandering by, their figures little more than fleeting silhouettes in the dim glow of the streetlights. I tried to focus on the path ahead, but every few steps I felt it, that sensation like a cold hand brushing the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the path behind me was deserted. "Stop it," I whispered under my breath, my voice trembling. "You're just imagining things." But then I saw them. Faint impressions in the damp grass beside the path. Footprints, larger than mine, spaced evenly as if someone had been walking just a few feet behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped, staring at them, and felt the blood drain from my face. They were mine. I crouched down, reaching out hesitantly toward the nearest print. The edges were sharp, fresh, as though someone had just stepped there. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked around again. The shadows of the trees, now darker, deeper. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine, not distant. Close. The soft crunch of grass, deliberate and heavy, growing louder with each second. My instincts kicked in, and before I knew it, I was running. The world blurred around me as I darted down the path, my shoes pounding against the gravel. My chest burned with each breath, the cold air slicing into my lungs. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The sound of those footsteps followed me, faster now, more erratic. I veered off the path, cutting through the trees, hoping to lose whoever or whatever was behind me. The damp grass clung to my shoes, the branches snagging at my sleeves as I pushed forward. The tower loomed in the distance, its golden lights flickering like a dying bulb. I tried to focus on it, to use it as my anchor, but the sense of dread was overpowering. The sound of the footsteps behind me grew louder, more frenzied. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. It echoed through the empty park, but there was no reply. Just the relentless sound of pursuit. My legs ached, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until I broke through the line of trees and stumbled back onto the plaza beneath the Eiffel Tower. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. For a moment, everything was silent. The footsteps had stopped. The air was still, the lights of the tower steady again, casting their golden glow over the square. But the relief didn't come. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing in my ears. I looked around, desperate to make sense of what had just happened. The plaza was empty, too empty. I forced myself to stand, my legs weak and unsteady. The tower seemed to mock me, its lights glinting like knowing eyes. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever had been following me was gone. But deep down, I knew better. Something was still out there. I could feel it, lurking just beyond the edge of the light, waiting. My body was here, but my mind was still trapped in the sound of those footsteps, the weight of those unseen eyes. And no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't finished. Not yet. Even now, hours later, I can't make sense of it. I'm sitting in my hotel room, every light on, the curtains drawn tight. But it doesn't matter. I can still feel it. That weight, those eyes. Every time I try to close my eyes, I see his face again. Those hollow eyes staring back at me. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the wind rattling the window, sends chills down my spine. I tell myself it's all in my head. But what about the footprints? The flickering lights? The footsteps? What if it wasn't just my imagination? I'm scared to sleep tonight. What if he's still out there? Or worse, what if he's already here? If you're listening, please tell me I'm not alone. Tell me what I should do, because right now, I'm not sure I can do this on my own. And this was one of our followers' stories. If you want your story to be told by us as well, leave it in the comments below this video. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch it.